Jerry Garcia's final marriage was to filmmaker Deborah Coons, and after his untimely death, she dealt him a brutal betrayal. Now, when he was barely out of diapers, Jerry Garcia experienced a terrifying moment during what should have been a fun family vacation in the Santa Cruz Mountains. In 1946, at 4 years old, Garcia was helping his older brother Tiff chop wood for the fire pit. They got into a speedy rhythm with Tiff swinging the axe and Jerry clearing away the logs when disaster struck. The boys' chopping somehow got out of sync, and Tiff's axe came down on young Jerry's hand. In a flash, his mother wrapped his finger in a towel. In the rush to the hospital, Garcia was too young and in shock to know exactly what had happened, and his family hid him from the truth. But weeks later, when he removed the last of his bandages, Garcia had the surprise of his life. Garcia had lost half a finger in the accident, and it seems the loss was only a warm-up for the unthinkable tragedy that 5-year-old Garcia would be forced to deal with just a year later. And yet again, it happened during a family vacation. In what must have started out as an idyllic scene, Garcia's father, Jose, was fly fishing in California's Trinity River. Suddenly, though, he slipped and fell into the rushing water, as Jerry Garcia later recalled in Rolling Stone, "I was there on the shore. I actually watched him go under. It was horrible." Jerry's father was a professional musician and bar owner, drowned before any of the nearby fishermen could save him. Garcia's mother, Ruth, took over her husband's bar and sent Jerry and Tiff to live with her parents. It was during this time that Garcia got into music and on a path that would change his life forever. The teenage years are all about risk-taking and experimentation, right? Well, by the time Jerry Garcia had turned 15, he was already locking in some lifelong passions, namely dope, cigarettes, and the electric guitar. His life was fun, and his vibe was carefree until one earth-shattering incident changed everything. California was the capital of car culture in the 60s, and what could be more liberating than cruising around town to score dope with your buddies? This is exactly what Jerry Garcia was doing one disastrous day in 1961. Unfortunately, the driver took a sharp turn at 140 kilometers an hour, and the car smashed into the guardrail and started spinning violently through the air. In yet another blood-curdling incident, Jerry Garcia flew through the windshield and landed in the field with such force that his shoes were left behind and he ended up with a broken collarbone. One of the car's other passengers lost his life. The chilling twist? Garcia had been sitting where the guy who died had been, but they switched seats just moments before the crash. Garcia was shook. That was the slingshot for the rest of my life. It was like a second chance. Then I got serious. Jerry Garcia was a new man, who boldly and ambitiously threw himself into his music. He spent long hours practicing and had started playing small gigs with a couple of pals. Garcia met Sarah Rupenthal in 1963 while she was working at a coffee house at the back of a bookstore where Garcia often performed. The pair, barely out of their teens, made beautiful music together as a duo. However, they were shocked to discover that they had created something even more life-altering. One can only imagine how nervous Sarah, who was going to Stanford at the time, was when she approached Garcia with the news that she was pregnant. Jerry exuberantly replied, "I've always wanted to be married." The pair had a speedy wedding because Garcia didn't want people to talk. Now sure, the car crash was a catalyst for Garcia, but its influence was small compared to what's next. According to Garcia, psychedelics changed everything. I suddenly realized that my little attempt at having a straight life just wasn't going to work out. The pieces started coming together when a very high Garcia opened a dictionary and immediately put his finger on the entry for Grateful Dead. It meant the soul of a dead person, or his angel, showing gratitude to someone who, as an act of charity, arranged their burial. Now, putting psychedelics in Kool-Aid was exactly what was happening during the mid-60s at a series of Bay Area events. At these trippy gatherings, held by Ken Kesey and his group of merry pranksters, the newly formed Grateful Dead band would jam away amongst the kaleidoscope strobe lights, flower children, and fluorescent paint. In this bizarre psychedelic stew, a new counterculture movement was forming, and Garcia was the key ingredient. Perhaps the psychedelics expanded Garcia and his wife's minds a little too far. After a daughter and 3 years of marriage, both of them started other relationships. By 1966, they had separated, and in 1967, just as the band's debut album dropped, the divorce was finalized. It was time for Garcia's next chapter and his next relationship. It was the era of free love, and when it came to romantic partners, people were pretty generous. Enter the Mountain Girl. She was the it girl of the psychedelic world, but there was just one problem. She had just had a child with Ken Kesey. Did we mention that Ken was much older, happened to be married to someone else, and was having issues of his own? Mountain Girl had been gallivanting in Mexico when she gave birth to Ken's daughter, but she quickly realized that she needed to go back to California and grow up. When she got off the bus and hugged her pal Garcia, she felt a huge jolt and told him she had a vision of them being together. Garcia looked at her with his famous smiling eyes and said, "You could stay with me." And just like that, Mountain Girl moved into the band's old Victorian house in San Francisco. She and Garcia were head over heels in love, at least until the band went on tour. She had her suspicions about what happened on the road, but tried not to ask questions. As the 60s ended, so did the vibe of freedom and fun, at least for Garcia. What could be better than spending a summer's day driving around Twin Peaks with gorgeous views of San Francisco and your best friend at your side? This is what Garcia's mother, Ruth, was doing. One day, while Garcia and the band were recording American Beauty, suddenly, somehow Ruth's dog made its way to the car's pedals and disaster struck. In the confusion, Ruth lost control and her car plunged off the side of a cliff. She ended up in intensive care with catastrophic injuries. She and Jerry had a rocky relationship, but everything changed after the accident. He visited her every day over the next month until her body finally gave out in September 1971. Band lyricist Robert Hunter spoke of the incident's impact on Garcia. "There's a lot of heartbreak on American Beauty, the band's masterpiece. The pathos in Jerry's voice on those songs, I think, has a lot to do with that experience." Despite all of the pain, the album American Beauty was a huge success, which meant it was time for the band to hit the road. Hopefully, the exhausting nightly process of getting lost in the music, cheering crowds, NDS, substances, would help Garcia forget his recent devastating losses, except it didn't. While Garcia was hooked on the hard stuff, there were definitely some quality control issues that even the most ardent fans couldn't ignore. Luckily for us, Garcia's bandmate decided to write a tell-all book about it. In this book, Bill really went there, writing that Garcia was sometimes so incapacitated he couldn't function. He also said Garcia would sometimes drill on the microphone and forget where he was during songs to the point where he had to resort to humming. As shambolic as the whole band could be at times, the fan base kept growing and the touring machine kept chugging along. As the saying goes, it takes all kinds, and this is very true when it comes to the band's diverse fans. Deadhead Steve Silverman likened the show's layout to a mandala with different sections. Fans of bassist Bill Lesh were in the fill zone, while the Wharf Rats held 12-step meetings during breaks in the show. Hearing impaired fans held onto balloons to feel the vibrations, and the Spinners bowed down to Garcia in religious ecstasy. It's almost impossible to imagine how Garcia felt being right in the middle of this strange universe. When asked what her dad thought of it all, Trixie revealed that he and the band were cynical, dark-humored guys. A band of pirates, really, and they were being followed around by these tofu-eating love people. Garcia's other daughter, with mountain girl, Annabelle, spoke about how growing up surrounded by mind-altering substances was the best. Just say no. PSA, ever. Quote, when we'd go to shows, we'd see young fans, 15 or 16 years old, taking way too many substances, really being zombied. It really drove it home. You don't want to do that to yourself. If only Garcia could have learned the same lesson as his daughter. Blame it on the error of free love, his natural anti-authoritarian stake, or his rock and roll lifestyle. But Jerry Garcia had a short attention span when it came to the ladies, and in 1973, his relationship with Mountain Girl was reaching its best before date. Where did he find his new love? Deborah Coons? Well, like many thousands of others, had a Grateful Dead show, of course. In the days before DMs, Garcia and Coons' new relationship started off with the exchange of snail mail, and in 1974, Garcia and Coons took it to the next level. Coons, who was an aspiring filmmaker who came from money, moved in with Garcia and even followed him on the road for a while, but found it too strenuous, and she was 100% right. Something had to give. Trouble was coming at Garcia from all angles. In addition to his rocky love life, tensions within the band were high as well. Everyone decided it was time for some farewell shows, and then a much-needed break. Now, after tossing the mother of his two daughters to the side, Garcia returned to Mountain Girl with his tail between his legs after a 2-year relationship with Coons. To Mountain Girl's credit, she gave it a go until she realized how deep he had gone down the rabbit hole of illicit substances. Exactly how bad was Garcia's addiction? Bad enough for Annabelle, his daughter with Mountain Girl, to confront him. Annabelle also explained why he had so many wives and lovers. He was always looking for the one to make it right. The next thing he knew, they were trying to get money off of him. Sadly, she wasn't wrong. Obsessive fans, maniac roadies, money troubles, tragic losses of life, romantic turmoil, and why not crank things up a notch by throwing a biker gang into the mix? With similar countercultural beliefs, the Hells Angels had been associated with the band since the early days. However, at times the relationship was a bit hair-raising. At one of the band's shows, the Angels took it too far. The biker gang rolled their choppers backstage, wielding knives, and demanded that the band play the song Truckin'. When the tour manager questioned Garcia's relationship with the bikers, he said, well, you know, good wouldn't mean much without evil. Now, as successful as the band was, Garcia still had money troubles. One part of the problem was the band had an unusually massive payroll, and another part of the problem was Garcia's $700 a day substance habit. That's about $2,600 a day in 2024. Good guy that he was, he deeply felt responsible for his team's livelihoods. His only other option was to push his exhausted, addicted body to the limit by taking on even more gigs as a solo artist. Soon, the band was flying high on the momentum of their massive hit, Touch of Grey, and Garcia was flying high on other things. By this point, he was so checked out that he would rest his chin on the microphone during shows. His voice was shot from smoke, he gained quite a bit of weight, and his sleep apnea didn't help matters. It was all too much for the band to continue turning a blind eye. In 1985, the band finally gave Jerry Garcia an ultimatum. Afterward, Garcia agreed to go to rehab, and in July 1986, it all caught up with him. He fell into a diabetic coma for 5 days. He had some very trippy experiences while he was under, but he woke up to an even bigger shock. As happy as Jerry Garcia must have been to been alive, he was likely devastated to discover that he would have to relearn not only several basic skills, but also how to play the guitar. It was a monumental task, but by the end of 1986, he and the band made a triumphant return. They kicked off their first show with Touch of Grey, which includes the refrain, I Will Survive. It was the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. Too bad he didn't treat it that way. Garcia's fresh start included many changes, including a new wife, Menasha, who he married in a spiritual ceremony, and daughter, Helene, who was born in 1987. But then there was also a never-ending tour. After 5 years on the road, he was exhausted. To make matters worse, he was suffering from carpal tunnel syndrome, a nightmare for guitarists. Jerry Garcia, new father, was a changed man. He made a valiant effort to stay clean, moved to Hawaii, took up scuba diving, became a vegetarian, and even cut back on his cigarettes. But perhaps seeking to relive the good old days, he left his wife Menasha to rekindle a relationship with Barbara Meyer, an old flame from the 60s who had given him his first guitar. Still, the pull of the addiction was strong. During a heart-to-heart, Barbara, who could see Garcia was deeply suffering, asked him why he didn't just walk away from the band. He replied, "Do you know how many people are depending on this show going down the road?" It was clear that the pressures were mounting. The band's last tour became known as the Tour of Doom because of multiple crowd control problems, multiple fans getting struck by lightning, and ominous vibes. The last show took place in July 1995 at Chicago's Soldier Field. A distant Garcia struggled with his equipment and kept messing up lyrics. One review ominously asked, "Is this a new beginning or the beginning of the end?" The review also described the show as ranging from painful to spectacular, which is a pretty good way to describe Garcia's life. In 1995, Jerry Garcia decided to give rehab another go. In the same month as the band's last concert, Garcia checked into the Betty Ford Center and then the Serenity Knowles Treatment Center on August 9, 1995. The stress, the pressure, the loss, the lifestyle, and the pain finally caught up to him. Garcia suffered a fatal heart attack in his sleep. When he was found in his room, staff reported that he still had the famous smile on his face. At the time of Garcia's passing, he was married to Deb, or Coons, the same filmmaker he'd spent a few years with in the 1970s. However, her behavior after his death hasn't won her many fans. Coons barred 2 of Garcia's ex-wives from his funeral and 1 from the spreading of his ashes, but that's not all she did. Coons managed Garcia's estate, and although the late rocker had agreed to pay Mountain Girl $5 million as part of their divorce settlement, Coons tried to go back on that agreement. As a result, Mountain Girl had to take the estate to court. Eventually, she settled for $1.25 million instead of what she was owed. And since then, Deborah has also been involved in a lawsuit against Garcia's beloved youngest daughter, Helene. Now that was the turbulent story of Jerry Garcia's life. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button. And if you're interested in more celebrity stories like this one, make sure to subscribe.